Hi, I'm Kyle Webb, and I spend a lot of time thinking about how systems actually work, who they work for, who they don't, and how we design them differently. Because most people aren't behind because they lack effort. They're behind because of how access is structured. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Most people don't realize they don't have access until it's already cost them years. They think they're in the game, they're working, they're progressing, they're doing what they're told. But the decisions that actually shape the outcomes, the capital that drives those decisions, the ownership that captures the upside, that's happening elsewhere. And if you're not close to that, you're not really in the game. Let me frame this for you. Most people think access is something you're given. Work hard, prove yourself, be patient. Eventually, someone lets you in. That's the story, but it's not really how it works. Access isn't granted, it's built. And more importantly, it's structured. Because access determines who actually gets to participate. And participation isn't just about being present. It's about who influences decisions, who benefits from outcomes, who shapes opportunities, and who captures value as it is created. So this isn't just an access problem, it's a capital system problem. The clearest way I've seen this play out is through my dad. My dad's first career after the military was working on the war on poverty in Los Angeles. He went in believing something most people believe, that if you design the right programs, you can change people's lives at scale. And over time, that belief, it broke. Not because the programs didn't exist, but because the people whose lives were improving weren't the people the programs were designed for. It was the people who were running the programs, his coworkers. The system was working, just not who it was supposed to work for. And that's an important shift because it moves the conversation away from effort and toward design. In 1973, he got recruited to McDonald's. They're not recruiting him because of who he is. They need people who can operate and help scale the business. His work had been noticed. That was his first real point of access, and that matters. Because access usually doesn't start with someone opening a door for you. It starts when your value becomes relevant to the system. Once he's in, he moved fast, promoted every few months, eventually became a field consultant working directly with franchisees and corporate leadership. And this is where things change, because once you're inside, you see how things actually work. At the time, McDonald's was struggling to retain Black franchisees. On paper, the opportunity existed. But in practice, it simply didn't work. Most Black operators were placed in lower income areas with higher operating costs. And then McDonald's rolled in prior underperformance into the purchase price. So now you've got operators starting behind. They were underleveraged, undercapitalized, and structurally constrained. From the outside, it looked like failure. From the inside, it's clearly a system problem. Executives asked my dad, "What's going on?" And this is the key moment. He doesn't frame it as a diversity issue. He frames it as a return problem. The opportunity as structure doesn't produce a viable return for the operators, but it also wasn't working for McDonald's Corporation. High turnover meant inconsistent operations, weaker performance, and a drag on the entire system. It misaligned on both sides. The cost of entry is too high relative to the cash flow. The capital structure didn't match the reality of the business. So the outcome is predictable. And he didn't just point that out. He brought a redesign. He lowered the cost of capital, removed the structural drag, aligned the economics. If you fix the structure, the outcomes change for both sides. McDonald's made the changes. Same people, different system, and turnover dropped. Performance improved. That's not accidental. That is alignment. You see the same thing on the employee side. Black employees weren't staying, not just because of overt racism kind of issues, but because they were entering environments they had never been exposed to. They were navigating the system that assumed participation, but that system didn't build pathways for participation. So again, the solution wasn't cosmetic, it was structural. You build translation, you build pathways, you make the environment navigable. Retention improves, leadership and representation follows. And none of this is happening in isolation. This is relationships, credibility inside the system, alignment with decision makers, coordination with people who can actually move things. Access doesn't move individually. It moves through aligned relationships. And by 1980, he was the regional manager of Southern California. Now, he's not just navigating the system, he's allocating access. He's hiring, he's franchising, he is deciding who gets the opportunity. And he makes those decisions differently than they had before. He hired franchisees in ways that reflect the real population, with Blacks and Latinos and Asians and women, people who normally wouldn't get those opportunities. And they performed. Not because they're exceptions, but because the system was finally structured to allow their success. What happened in Southern California is important because it's not just progress. It was a natural experiment. It showed clearly that when you align access with structure, outcomes change. That becomes the foundation for what came next. At the same time, he realized something else. He's helping create generational wealth for other people through franchising, but his job could not be inherited by his kids. But we could inherit his business. So he shifted from operating in the system to owning within it, from access to participation. But here's the part most people miss. He's operating on two levels at the same time. He's changing his own position so we, his family, can participate across generations. And he's also continuing to push for structural change so the people he represents have better access, better economics, and a real chance to succeed. Most people don't think like that. They think about access for themselves. Very few people think about access for other people. Almost no one designs for both at the same time. Even then, the system still isn't equitable. There were hundreds of Black franchisees, but only a small number of them were truly successful. So he stepped into leadership among the franchisees, and he helped lead what became the parity agreement. This wasn't about access for access's sake. It was about redesigning the system so people can actually influence decisions, access capital on good terms, operate profitably, and build something that compounds. And this part matters. This doesn't happen because it's the right thing to do. It happens because the economics make sense. Lower turnover, better operations, stronger performance. The redesign aligns incentives. That's why it worked. Over time, the outcomes flipped. And he was clear about one thing. If you benefit from a system, you're responsible for improving it for the people coming behind you. Because access that isn't extended doesn't compound. It isolates. That expectation doesn't disappear. It becomes embedded. The National Black McDonald's Owners Operators Association is still doing that work today. So when you step back and look at it, this isn't a moment. This is progress. You get in because your value is needed. You learn how the system actually works. You build relationships that create proximity and trust. You start to move. And you keep moving. You move from participating in access to shaping how it's distributed. Most people stop too early. They aim for access to environments, to rooms, to titles, to visibility. That's not the goal. Access is only useful if it allows you to influence decisions, direct capital, and participate in the value being created. Otherwise, you're present, but you're not participating. And here's the part people don't like to hear. If you don't have access to those layers, you're behind. Not in effort, not in position. You're working harder inside the wrong structure won't change the outcome. You have to get closer to where decisions are made. You have to understand how capital flows. And you have to build relationships that allow you to participate in that flow. When you do, you get access. If you only use it for yourself, you've misunderstood the leverage. That's the part most people miss. Access that stays with you doesn't build anything beyond you. Access isn't given, it's built, it's structured, and it's reinforced over time. The people shaping outcomes aren't waiting to be included. They're influencing decisions, directing capital, and designing systems that determine who benefits. If you're not doing that, you're operating inside someone else's design. If you're determining who participates and how capital flows and where the outcomes land, you're shaping the system. If this resonated, subscribe. And if you know someone who's working hard but still feels like they're not getting access, send this to them. You can find more at KyleAWebb.com. I'm Kyle Webb, and I'll see you in the next one.